Okay, the last word has clearly not been said in the Essar steel saga, and now the NCLAT has come out with some strict observations on the difference between operational and secured and unsecured creditors. And they're saying that only 4% cannot be allowed, 92% cannot of the bid amount cannot be kept for secured creditors, and leave the operational creditors only with 4%. Let's straight away go to Ashmit to understand what exactly the court has said today. Ashmit.
Well, the challenge to the NCLT order, which had approved the Arcelor bid for 42,000 crore rupees, was up for consideration before the appellate tribunal. The first takeaway, of course, with respect to the Essar promoters' application, on that, the NCLT made a very curt observation that the offer suggested by the Essar promoters is bad, if not rotten. Those are the exact words. And with that, he's refused to pass any further interim order on that. The Essar promoters had been seeking a stay on the Arcelor bid. That clearly has not happened, so that's one big takeaway. The other big takeaway, of course, is that here the NCLT appears to be batting for the operational creditors. The operational creditors the NCLT held cannot be marginalized. It seems that they are the oppressed lot as far as this entire deal is concerned, that the principle of maximization of recoverables applies even to the operational creditors, and that as part of this entire bid, only 4% has been earmarked for operational creditors, and that the NCLT said is a cause for concern. With that, what's important is that the NCLT has suggested a formula. 10% of the bid amount should be reserved for the operational creditors. That's the formula that the NCLT has suggested, which would leave the balance amount for the financial creditors as well as other dues. So that's one key suggestion that's coming in. He suggested for the COC to consider that. The COC is opposing this idea outright. The COC said that as far as this entire IBC structure is concerned, it is designed for the financial lenders to secure their own dues, and that if that is not the case, if the operational creditors will get preferential treatment over the secured lenders, then they could very well push the company into liquidation. This invited sharp comments from the Arcelor bid. Arcelor, on their part, have clarified their position that as far as they're concerned, they've submitted a bid of 42,000 crore rupees plus 8,000 crore rupees working capital to reject it. So that's a comeback with a reply. The hearing we undertook.
Okay, interest matter. We haven't heard the last. 10% of the bid should be reserved for operational creditors. That's the big statement or the big proposal. Let's see if the Committee of Credit are willing to take that, or if they'll sort of put up an argument against it. Thank you, Ashmit, very much for telling us all the latest on that one. Right now, as promised, let's move on and talk about the economy as we count down to the mega event of the general elections. We're taking a look at how the macros have fared during the BJP's tenure since 2014. Lata is here with that analysis.
As part of our countdown to the elections, we have our special series, It's the Economy, where we are looking at various aspects of the economy in the past 5 years. And we start with the macros. When we say macros, the first obvious indicator is GDP. How did the 5 years of the BJP perform vis-a-vis the previous terms in terms of GDP growth? It clearly stands higher at 7.5%. But that is because the back series was recast, something which most economists in the country are uncomfortable with, the recasting of the previous GDP numbers up to 2004. So let us look at the older numbers, the older series of the GDP without the backcasting. If we look at that, then the BJP 5 years are just as good as the second term of the UPA, and not quite good compared to the first term of the UPA, where the average was 8%. And especially if you look at the last 3 years of the BJP term, it is clearly a drop from a high of 8.2 to 7.2 to 7%, and some believe it may not even touch 7% in the last year. Now, one of the reasons why there was discomfort with the previous recasting of the GDP series is because of the other data that has caused a loss of faith in the GDP numbers. The loss of faith is partly because growth indicators have shown that the economy did actually worse in the last 5 years. First, look at earnings growth. The last 5 years have seen the slowest earnings growth for corporate India in the last 20 years. It stands at just 4.1% average. And we are looking at Nifty earnings compared to Nifty earnings growth of 10 to 15% in the two terms of the UPA, the first UPA and the second UPA. While corporate earnings are seen picking up in the current year, these are just the 5 years of the BJP. It's coming up to maybe 9% in the current year, but still not even touching double digits. Likewise, let us look at credit growth. That has again been the weakest if you compare to the previous terms. If you compare in the last 20 years, it's under 10% in the averaging in the last 5 years compared to a credit growth of 15 to 28% during the 2 terms of the UPA. Let us take another growth indicator, gross fixed capital formation. That's clearly picked up in the last 5 years, coming up to about 7.7%, definitely higher than the second term of the UPA, but it is still half of what it was in the first term of the UPA. Now, let us look at indicators other than growth. First, inflation. Here, the BJP clearly has a fabulous record compared to UPA too. I mean, inflation is at half what it was on an average of this second UPA term. But one has to caveat this. Global inflation itself was very high during the second UPA term, that is 2009 to 2014. Remember, crude was averaging over $100 for most of that time, and metals too had ruled very high. Metal prices crashed in 2015, and therefore, you know, that helped the BJP term also have a good inflation number. Again, we must caveat that food deflation may not even be an achievement. It is actually a curse in the current BJP term. Let's look at now the deficits. Current account deficit is definitely much better controlled by the BJP government for the 5 years than the UPA did. The only caveat over here is, despite this very stable performance on the current account deficit front, it did not help exports. In fact, export growth has been the worst in the UPA term, just 1.9%, as you can see, compared to a high of 23.9% in the UPA first term and 12% annual growth every year average in the second UPA term. Fiscal deficit, here again, very good achievement as far as the current BJP term is concerned, falling from over 5% average, 5.3 during the UPA second UPA term to an average of 3.7% in the BJP years. However, one must be wary of the last year of this term, where an overestimation of tax revenues to the extent of 19.5% makes this year's fiscal deficit a little difficult to believe, a little difficult to achieve. Also, a lot of loans taken by the government are probably hiding in public sector units like Food Corporation and PFC. So probably the deficit is higher than what these numbers indicate. Well, with that, let's go to the next indicator, the NDA government's performance as far as employment is concerned. And here, it's quite clearly the worst. We rely on the latest NSSO survey, which, of course, the government refused to put in the public domain. We have the numbers thanks to Business Standard, and that shows that unemployment in the year 2018 stood at a 45-year high of 6.1% following demonetization. Now, that's a bad record, and what is worse, it was hushed up.
Okay, so some important stats there to perhaps ponder over. Thank you, Lata, for that.